Well, good evening and welcome to the 2020 Insight Women's Center fundraising event, Rescue. Before we get started, we're going to have Pastor John McDermott open us with a word of prayer.
Thank you, Pete. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight and celebrating the Insight Women's Center. And what an exciting night. Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for bringing us together to celebrate the life-saving work that is being accomplished through this incredible ministry. Lord, we know from your word that your heart is near to the little ones, and you call us to stand with mothers in love, hope, and faith. We ask you, Jesus, that during this time today, we would be encouraged by the impact this work has accomplished. Let the testimony of the powerful rescues strengthen our resolve to believe that our work together makes a difference. In Jesus' name, amen.
Welcome again. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch this. The people over at Insight just do a fantastic job, and we were planning this in the spring for the live event. I've had it circled on my calendar to be an MC. I've never been an MC before. It's kind of exciting stuff for me, and so we were all a little bit deflated when we found out we couldn't have a live conference. But it's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic, and I think you're going to have a great time. My name is Pete Knutson. I am the president of McDaniel Knutson Financial Planners. I am the MC for the Insight Women's Center 2020 virtual banquet, if that's what we'll call it that, the virtual banquet. McDaniel Knutson has been a proud sponsor of Insight, and prior to that, Pregnancy Care Center for a little over 15 years or so. I got introduced to Insight when we hired Cindy Folks, who's been my assistant for about 14 years or thereabouts, and just couldn't be happier with being able to support them and seeing that the work that they do. A couple of the reasons why we support Insight is because babies are really cool. I've got 5 of them. I've got teenagers now, so they're a little less cool than they used to be, but nothing lights up the room like a baby. Nothing lights up a room like a big old baby chortle. If you want to get 1,000 likes in social media, put a laughing baby on the thing and it goes viral instantly. It's one of those things that babies are just great. They just are. It's the universal language. So we love kids. I love kids. Kids are great. And in light of this COVID stuff that's going on, you hear on TV that we're all in this together. Well, we're kind of together. We're mostly alone. And a lot of women that come into the center are feeling very alone, very vulnerable, very scared. They don't feel like they're in it together. And so where Insight comes in is they let these young moms know that, hey, we are really in this together. We're here for you. We have resources. We have a plan, a playbook for you to follow. You're not alone. And they do everything they can to help the baby, to help the mom, to help the other family members get involved. And if there's something that's more important to us than babies and families, I want to know what it is, because it's really, really powerful stuff. So it's really easy for us at the company to support Insight. It's really easy to support them, especially once you get to know the people who work there and the people who volunteer there. And I've had the privilege of meeting a few of the clients that have come in too. They're just fantastic people, and it's a great organization. So we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. First things first, some business stuff. Our annual budget is about $260,000 per year. We are 100% financed by generous donors. Tonight, we're trying to raise just about half of that, $130,000. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our underwriting partners, Oral Surgery of Kansas, Roger and Sharon Shennework, and Platinum Title. They have been our underwriting sponsors for this event, and they've been fantastic partners. There are a lot of ways you can get involved too. You can click on the link below, and that'll take you straight to the fundraising page. You can also mail us a check at the address that is also located in that link below as well. All right, I've been talking long enough for now. I'm going to take a little break, and you're going to get to see a video of Insight Women's Center, what they do, how they do it, and I think you're going to find it very informative, and I hope you enjoy it.
Insight Women's Center, IWC, was born from a generous vision of the Topeka Crisis Pregnancy Outreach Ministry in 2003. In 2006, the Pregnancy Care Center, now known as Insight Women's Center, ventured out on their own. What started in a one-room office over the years has grown due to the faithful support of local churches and individuals. The ministry has gone through different names, locations, and service models to effectively bring hope to women at risk for abortion and provide life-saving measures for the unborn. For over 17 years, God has moved in mighty ways, using the team at Insight Women's Center to lavish hope to women facing a pregnancy crisis, resulting in hundreds of babies being born. Insight Women's Center's service model has grown to include prevention, intervention, and extension services to the Lawrence Douglas County community. The prevention services offered include activity-based sexual risk avoidance education rooted in scientific data which addresses the whole person rather than merely focusing on sexual behavior. IWC's intervention services are at the heart of what they do. These medical services include pregnancy tests, limited OB sonograms, and pregnancy options education. Routinely, during these appointments, the ministry team at IWC is walking with women through one of the hardest decision-making processes they will ever face. The extension services offered through IWC allows for strong relationships to develop with clients, partnering agencies, and the Lawrence Douglas County community. This widening of services includes parenting education classes, after abortion healing and miscarriage early infant loss support services, women's Bible studies, and a student organization on the campus of KU, Insight at KU. The Banquet team had no idea when choosing the theme Rescue last fall that our nation would be in a global pandemic. But God knew, and He knew that many single women and families in the Lawrence Douglas County community would need rescuing. In mid-March, when the initial closures began, all in-center educational classes were halted. However, God prepared things ahead of time. Earlier this year, the center staff implemented a new online curriculum, which includes a texting feature. Unable to hold class in person, the IWC team has been texting educational videos for moms and dads to view at home. Throughout the shutdown and re-entry, IWC has been supplying essential needs such as diapers, wipes, formula, and baby care items. They immediately started offering these essential items to anyone in need. Since the start of COVID, the center has handed out over 400 bags, giving out over 16,000 free diapers, 380 packages of wipes, 100 cans of formula, 250 baby care items, new car seats, and a high chair. As the pandemic hit our country, and most of you were staying at home, young women in Lawrence were taking pregnancy tests and realizing they were facing a pregnancy crisis. Insight Women's Center's intervention services were deemed essential. The IWC Board of Directors determined that if the abortion clinics in our state were staying open, so was IWC. And so it began. The center started seeing clients in extreme distress. Fears were heightened in women facing an unplanned pregnancy due to the coronavirus, forcing some to consider an option they wouldn't have otherwise considered. A portion of the lyrics in Lauren Daigle's song, Rescue, says, "You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not hopeless. Though you have been broken, your innocence stolen, I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS." Services during this pandemic have looked different. but still answered the silent whispers of frightened women. Women are being seen, heard, and encouraged through Insight Women's Center. As women whisper their cries of distress, God answers them with IWC as the life preserver. Whether it's through the center's prevention, intervention, or extension services, women and families are being rescued.
I told you it was a cool place. We'd love to have you come down and check it out, walk around, take a tour, and see what it's all about. And we think you'll really enjoy it. Now, a really powerful testimony from a woman who was rescued through the great work at IWC. I think you'll find her testimony fantastic, and you'll understand why I'm so excited to support IWC and all the work they do.
I grew up in a troubled family who went to church every Sunday, but I did not have a relationship with God. As a teenager, I was involved in a summer fling. I was 14 and he was 16. After that summer, I never saw him again. When I realized I might be pregnant, I was in denial, scared, and didn't know what to do. I hid my pregnancy as long as possible because I knew my mother would not allow me to keep my baby. Over Christmas break, I had an abortion. In order to deal with the situation, I just told myself this happened and now I just need to move on. As a young adult, I became a Christian. Even though it was not my choice to have an abortion, I had always owned it. Although I thought I had come to terms with it and knew that God had forgiven me, I always felt that I was not experiencing the full love of God. Then, it was just last year when my rescue began. A friend asked me if I was interested in going to an after-abortion retreat. To be honest, after I said yes, I wondered why I agreed to go, because I thought I had fully dealt with my abortion. I attended the retreat last April, and I felt washed in God's Word as I worked through the Forgiven and Set Free study. Each participant's story is unique. Because of that, participants may feel touched by God at various points during the retreat. For me, it was the pie of responsibility that asked me to consider my responsibility and the responsibility of others who had a role in my abortion. The exercise took me back to the day of my abortion. As I talked through it at the retreat, I felt like I was the only one there. A rush of emotions flooded over me, and the feelings of having no control, sadness, guilt, and anger that I had buried deep down inside for so many years came to the surface. I realized that I had felt totally helpless on the day of the abortion and felt overwhelmed that I could not protect my baby. Years later, after researching abortion, I figured out that I had gone through a saline birth abortion late in my pregnancy. It took place in a hospital, and I went through labor to deliver my baby. I was left weak, worn out, and without a baby. Then I went back to school and tried to move on with my life and thought I had put it all behind me. It was the pie of responsibility exercise that made me realize I had been carrying the full responsibility of my abortion. I knew God had forgiven me for the abortion, but I had never forgiven myself. Because I felt strongly it is the mother's responsibility to protect her baby, and I had failed to protect my baby, and I had never forgiven myself for that. I also needed to forgive my mother who did not protect me or my baby. I forgave myself and my mother and experienced a deep release of pain and emotion that day at the retreat. God lifted a great burden from me. An overwhelming sense of peace came over me that day, and I felt God's love stronger than I ever have before. The wall that I felt was keeping me from being really close to God had tumbled down. My encounter with God at the retreat revealed that I was in great denial about my abortion and needed to be rescued, And I know this need for rescue is true for many other women. It may surprise you to know that 1 in every 3 women has had an abortion. So there is a lot of rescuing that needs to be done. It is not just women who are suffering. I have shared my story with friends and was amazed when 2 men admitted to me they were deeply affected by abortion because they had no say in the loss of their babies. I am telling my story hoping it will help others who are hurting and need healing and rescue. Through the Forgiven and Set Free retreat, I was able to grieve the loss of my baby. After much prayer, I named my baby Asa, which means healer. By faith and the hope that the retreat restored in me, I know I will meet Asa in heaven one day.
Wow, that was powerful. Man, if there's any doubt in your mind how God is working through Insight, this is just one of countless stories of women that have been rescued from the uncertainty that they're in. And like I said a minute ago, what Insight is able to do is just out of this world. The way they are able to rescue young women like the one you just heard is really spectacular. So keeping with the aquatic metaphor of rescuing, the captain of the ship over at Insight is Bridget Smith. She's been there about 7 years. You're going to hear from her in a minute after I'm done. And I think you'll know after spending a minute or two with her, especially if you get to meet her in person, you'll understand why IWC is in such great hands. And everywhere she goes in town, you find corporate partners like us or individual donors like some of the ones I mentioned before, just happy as they can be to support not only the mission of the center, but the people that are there as well. Because you can have a great mission, and you can have a great ship, but if you don't have a captain that knows where they're going and knows what they're doing, it's all for naught. So with that, you hear a few words from Bridget. Like I said, she's been here about 7 years. She is a fantastic networker and fundraiser and all-around good person, and I know you'll enjoy hearing from her.
A client, I'll call Maria, came into the center frightened and confused about what to do with her pregnancy. She came back a week later for a sonogram and options counseling. At that time, she told us that she did not plan to continue the pregnancy. She has an older daughter with serious health issues, and she didn't want to see another child suffer like she's watched her older daughter. She started asking us how to proceed with an abortion and where to go, and we explained to her that we do not refer for abortions. We discussed other options to her, but she was not open to talking about adoption or parenting at that time. So our nurse went ahead and provided a referral list for her for OB/GYN doctors in the area that do not perform abortions. The client thanked us and left. 2 months went by with no contact. Psalms 82, 3 and 4 says, "Defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked." In studying verse 4, I learned that rescue the weak referred to not only when they cry for help, but also when their cause requires aid and support. That's exactly what the team at IWC does. We provide aid and support when working with women. And Maria's story is a beautiful example of that. What I didn't initially share is that her native language is Spanish. And when she initially came in, she brought a friend along to translate for her. However, when she came back for her sonogram, we intentionally had a volunteer that spoke her language. We wanted to provide the aid and support that Maria needed. There was a 2-month lapse, and then Maria returned to our center. She shared the story of her visit to the abortion clinic. When she got into the clinic that day, there was no one that spoke her language, and she said those at the clinic did not treat her as kindly as those in our center. So she walked out that day and didn't have an abortion. And now she wonders how she could even think of doing that. We received a phone call 2 weeks ago from Maria telling us that her baby daughter had arrived. She's 2 weeks old, and that she needed the packages that we provide with diapers, wipes, and formula. Friends, it takes my breath away when I witness God moving in the hearts and lives of women He brings into our center. IWC is a life preserver. We're helping preserve life of babies and women. We're bringing aid to women who need education and baby supplies. And we provide services which aid in the healing for women who have experienced emotional pain and damage from an abortion decision. Our annual spring banquet is the highlight of my year. And I'm sad that right now I'm sitting here looking into the camera instead of out across the Birds Union at all of you. But I'm also excited because I know some of you that are watching tonight, you would not be able to come to Lawrence to see our event and to learn more about our center. Coronavirus has brought many challenges into our lives and into the center, but God has brought blessings. Those who dropped off supplies, financial support, and prayed for us, thank you. It's been fun and exciting to watch God provide what the center needed at the precise moment because of your obedience and faithfulness. You know, the board and I had been praying about ways in which our community could find out about us and see and feel the heart of our ministry. And God has given us the opportunity during COVID as we provided free baby supplies to women and families in our community who had never heard of the center before. It blows my mind that we have given out over 16,000 diapers in a 3-month period. That's a lot of wet bottoms. Pre-COVID-19, we were well on our way for planning an expansion of both our center and the services in our center. And then COVID arrived. Events were canceled, businesses started closing, the stay-at-home order came, and we saw the stock market take a hit. Initially, I panicked. Waves of fear engulfed me as I thought about the women that need our services. And then we had to postpone our fundraiser. I wondered how long our reserve money would last if donations dropped off. How could we even consider expansion plans during these unsettling times? But God. Fear was replaced with assurance as I saw God work through so many of you. Your faithful obedience has built my faith back up. The rescue work done at IWC is near and dear to God's heart. It's His plans that we're pursuing, not our own. And He will make all plans abound in every good work. Our plans include expanding both our physical space and our services. Our physical space would be achieving the vision that we had for the building when it was initially purchased. We've been really cozy here. We've been making do with less square footage, but we see the need to grow into more of our building. We're going to expand into Suite B, and what that is going to include is a second exam room, administrative offices, large conference room, and additional storage. And then we've decided to broaden access to our services so we can increase the number of women we serve. We will be partnering with Life Care Center in Ottawa, offering their medical mobile unit on KU campus, as well as within Lawrence and beyond. And then we are expanding services to provide STI testing and treatment for women who come for a pregnancy test and ultrasound. We realize this is a valuable medical service, but it's also a bridge to engage in further conversation and relationship building with our clients. The IWC team is hopeful and excited about the future. And I want to thank each and every one of you, our ministry partners, for partnering with us in Jesus' love and compassion for the women we serve. It is with great honor I introduce our keynote speaker, Melissa Oden. Melissa Oden is a survivor of a failed saline infusion abortion. Believing she was less than 5 months pregnant with Melissa in 1977, her birth mother attempted to abort her. Miraculously, the abortion failed in ending Melissa's life. Although the doctors initially believed that she would not live past her infancy, and if she did, she would suffer from multiple disabilities throughout her lifetime, she was adopted into a loving home as an infant, and she's not only survived, but thrived. As Melissa will be sharing with us, her life, her story, is so much more than one of survival. Melissa's testimony speaks to the beauty of God's grace in our lives, about the power of love, about hope, and healing in the midst of grief and loss, and about the transformational power of forgiveness, and in answering God's call for your life. Melissa's perspective as an abortion survivor who has had contact with numerous members of her biological family, and as a mother herself, highlights the intergenerational impact of abortion on families and communities. Fulfilling the purpose that she believes God set out for her when He saved her from the certain death of an abortion attempt, Melissa is truly a voice for the voiceless.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Oden, and I am thrilled to be joining you all tonight as the speaker at your virtual fundraiser now for the Insight Women's Center. I know, like all of you, I was looking forward to being there in person tonight to show our support of this ministry. But what I love is that in the midst of all of the uncertainty and obstacles that so many people have faced in the last couple of months, the one thing that can't be prevented is people turning out in support of places just like Insight Women's Center. I love that they have done what they needed to do to think outside of the box and allow us this opportunity to share time together tonight to celebrate their life-saving and life-transforming work. And through tonight, allow them to meet the needs of the women and men and children that they serve without any kind of gaps in service and funding. To me, that is just incredibly important at this time in our world, because even though I know we've faced our own difficulties and obstacles in each of our families, I often think about the women and the men and the children that are served through pregnancy centers, just like Insight Women's Center. Their services are needed now more than ever as people have faced loss of jobs, so many crises. And so I just truly appreciate Bridget and Keely and everyone with Insight Women's Center doing everything they have to make tonight possible. And I want to take a moment to just thank each and every one of you for tuning in tonight. I know that I don't have to convince you that the work of Insight Women's Center is important. That's why you're tuning in tonight. I don't have to convince you of that. What I hope to do, of course, is to further convict you, to remind you of just how much Insight Women's Center is needed in your community and what an incredible difference they make. I know many people recognize my name. Sometimes they recognize my face or my voice. And I know that my life story can often be difficult for people to hear. But what I hope to do tonight as I share my story with you is use it to highlight the important work of Insight. I'm from the other side of the abortion experience. I truly believe that if my biological mother would have had a place like Insight to turn to 42 years ago, I'm 42, it's okay, we'll get that little piece out of the way, right? 42 years ago, I do truly believe my birth mother's life and mine and truly our entire biological family could have been radically different. And that's why I support the work of pregnancy centers just like Insight, because I believe every woman deserves better than abortion. Every woman deserves resources and support. Every child, just like me, deserves better than abortion. They deserve life. They deserve to be loved. And I just so appreciate the fact that Insight is allowing those things to happen through the incredible work that they're doing in your community. As I shared, I guess I let the cat out of the bag a little bit about my age. I'm 42. And, in all honesty, my biological mother's abortion didn't take place terribly far from here. So I live in Kansas City now, but I grew up in Iowa, and it was 42 years ago in Sioux City, Iowa, that my biological mother found herself facing her unplanned pregnancy with me. And what I know about my birth mother is that really she fit most statistics when it comes to abortion. She looked an awful lot like the women who come through the doors of Insight still today. My birth mother was 19 years old. She was a college student. She wasn't yet married to my biological father. And sadly, one of the greatest statistics she fits is one that isn't often talked about in our society, and that's coercion. It's such an interesting thing, isn't it, that we live in a society that talks about abortion being a choice and a right. But if you peel back those words and you listen to women's experiences, if you sat down with Bridget and their team, I'm sure they would tell you story after story of women who identified that they really weren't given any other choice when it comes to abortion. Statistically, the Elliott Institute reports that about 64% of women, 64%, identify feeling pressured into their abortion decision. And as you're going to hear tonight, really it's taken me most of my 42 years of life to piece together the storyline of my life and my biological mother's. But as I started to learn more about my birth mother years ago, I started to question whether she was coerced into her abortion with me. I had first been told it was her choice, and then as I started to investigate her family, I started to suspect she had been coerced like so many women. And sadly, what I learned in recent years is that it was taken even one step further for her. That saline infusion abortion that was meant to end my life and forever changed hers isn't just something she was coerced into. It was literally forced upon her against her will. She was given no other choice. And I know if you're like most people, the wheels in your head start turning right away. You start questioning who it would have been that would have done such a thing. And I suspect Bridget and her team could probably identify other circumstances like my birth mother's. Circumstances where very well-intentioned friends, family members, sometimes medical professionals, even members of the clergy, can be responsible for forcing an abortion. In my birth mother's case, it was her mother, my maternal grandmother, who was responsible for forcing that abortion. That tends to be a very common experience among women that I hear about. In my birth mother's circumstance, what made it a little bit unique was that my grandmother was a prominent nurse in their Sioux City community. So she knew an awful lot about the scientific and the biblical basis for when life begins. But what she, of course, also knew through her work as a prominent nurse was how to make a secret forced abortion take place on her own daughter, bypassing hospital regulations and procedures at the time, with the help of her friend and colleague, the local abortionist. That's how they were able to force that abortion upon my birth mother. They didn't believe anybody would ever find out that it wasn't my birth mother's choice. And most certainly, of course, no one would ever hear from me. But clearly, God had other plans for people to hear my voice, to know my story, and to know what was done to my biological mother. I know abortion is not an easy thing to hear about ever, especially on a night like this when we're celebrating the life-saving and life-transforming work of this ministry. But I need to share a little bit about that abortion procedure with you so you can understand just what God has done in my life. That saline infusion abortion involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. The intent of that toxic salt solution was to poison and scald me to death. Typically, the procedure lasted about 72 hours. The child would soak in that toxic salt solution. If they were lucky enough, their life was usually ended within about the first 12 hours. And then they would induce labor with the intent of that deceased child being expelled from the womb. As horrific as all of that is, we actually know through my medical records that I didn't soak in that toxic salt solution for just 3 days. I actually soaked in it for 5, even 2 days longer than the standards of that procedure, quite simply because they could not successfully induce my birth mother's labor. You know, I often joke I'm a little stubborn, as you can gather, right? I was not budging then. And I like to think that God gave me that spirit because he needed me to have that stubbornness to do this work in this world. But of course, all kidding aside, back then, the longer I soaked in that toxic salt solution, the greater the likelihood should have been that my life was successfully ended. And when they finally successfully induced my birth mother's labor on that 5th day of the procedure, they believed that I would be, quote unquote, delivered as a successful abortion, otherwise known as a deceased child. Can you imagine the shock that went through the hospital room that day when I was actually born alive? The saline infusion abortion is not a procedure routinely performed anymore, quite simply because too many of us survived. If you read about it online or in medical journals, you'll actually find that we are called the dreaded complication of abortion, a child who lives. And I think this is an important thing to bring up because even though the world has changed a lot in 2020, 2019 really saw a lot of aggressive abortion legislation being introduced across the nation. And a lot of that focused on survivors. And so if you were paying attention to that, you'll find that, of course, that many things were being said, that abortions don't fail, that children don't live, that it's just a myth, this is something that is made up. And I'm here to tell you this does happen, and I see it happen still today in our world. I wish I could tell you that back then, when I was born alive in that abortion procedure, everyone saw my humanity and immediately rallied for me to be provided medical care. But that's not usually how this happens. My mom and dad were told initially that I was laid aside, while there were arguments made about whether I would be provided medical care. I was blessed just a few years ago now to be contacted by a nurse directly who had read my book and knew instantly as she read the book that I was the baby she remembered from St. Luke's Hospital in 1977. She reached out to me after reading my book, and she was able to share her story with me. And that story was that she was working in the neonatal intensive care unit that day in August of 1977 when a little girl survived a failed abortion. She said, "I'll never forget it. The door to the NICU came flying open that day. This tall blonde nurse rushed you in." She had a lot of colorful things to say, but she made it clear that she was unwilling to just leave me there to die. And I know I owe my life to that nurse. I know the Lord put her there that day, knowing that she would ultimately do the right thing for me. But that's why I'm here sharing my story with you tonight, because at least one person was willing to fight for me that day. And I still get emotional about it no matter how many times I tell that story. You know, most of us will never be in that position that we are literally fighting for the life of a child. But that is the work of Insight Women's Center. They are fighting the front lines every single day. They are on the front lines trying to, of course, help and support women and provide them resources. And by intervening in the lives of women, they are saving the lives of children just like me. And that is an impact that I am so incredibly grateful for. I know you would never know by looking at me today that when I survived that failed abortion 42 years ago, the prognosis for my life was very poor. When I was delivered alive in that abortion procedure, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I weighed a whopping 2 pounds, 14 ounces, which indicated to the medical professionals that my birth mother was much further along in her pregnancy than the 18 to 20 weeks that the abortionist had written on my medical records. In fact, when a neonatologist first examined me, he remarked in my medical records, he estimated me to be about 31 weeks. 31 weeks. I know the Lord hid the truth about my life, knowing that the longer I stayed in the womb, the greater the likelihood would ultimately be that I could survive. But I so appreciate that the Lord works in a very different way through Insight. Nothing is hidden. It's a ministry that is founded and grounded in truth. The truth about resources and choices and support, the truth about the unborn child, We know that when women are provided information about fetal development, when they see their child through ultrasound, we know by and large women choose life. Why? Because they're provided truth. They see the truth. And I love that that's what Insight is doing every single day, is sharing much needed truth that ultimately saves and transforms the lives of the women and the men and the children that they serve. But here I was, years ago, this little less than 3-pound baby delivered alive in an abortion procedure. Like many premature infants, I suffered a multitude of health issues, severe respiratory and liver problems. I suffered from seizures for an extended period of time. The doctors actually thought I had a fatal heart defect initially because of the amount of distress I was under. And so they were very guarded about whether I would continue to live for very long, and if I did, really believed that I would suffer from a multitude of disabilities throughout my life. And I am forever grateful that no matter what my parents were told about what my life would look like, they didn't hesitate for a second to open their hearts and their home to me. Other people know them as my adoptive parents, but I simply know them as my mom and dad. And my mom and dad knew the story of my life, raised me to know Jesus from my youngest age, raised my older sister, who's also adopted, raised us both to know that adoption meant that we were deeply loved. And not just by them and not just by God, but deeply loved by our biological parents. That's really what my parents wanted me to believe and know about my biological parents throughout my life, that they loved me enough to give me life and the gift of my amazing family. They didn't want me to know the story of my survival because they were afraid of how that kind of truth might impact the way I felt about my biological parents. And so, like many parents in that position, they kept it a secret. But God intended for me to know the story of my survival, and He allowed it to come forward in a very unplanned and unexpected kind of way when I was 14 years old. At that age, my older sister, as a high school student, faced her own unplanned pregnancy. And even though we were raised in a home with very firm beliefs about the gift of life and the gift of adoption, like so many women, the women who come through the doors of Insight, she had a lot of fears and anxieties. And unbeknownst to our parents, she was considering every option, which included abortion. When our parents heard those words, they decided to do something very important. They broke their silence. They told her my story in the hopes that she would understand just how much abortion impacts each and every one of our lives. That was about 28 years ago now that my sister was told the story of my survival. I'm happy to tell you my oldest nephew will soon be 27 years old. He's an amazing man, a member of the military, just a wonderful father. I am just so grateful for him. And I am so thankful that even though he knows he could have been another statistic when it comes to abortion, more importantly, he knows he was created for just such a time as that. Because I don't think there's any other way I would have found out the story of my survival, but through his very existence. Because after my sister found out the story of my survival, like any good teenage sister, she didn't keep it a secret from me. Some of you know teenage sisters. Some of you have had teenage sisters. You know what this is like, right? I can laugh about it now. Back then, it was certainly not a laughing matter as it all played out. But I can honestly tell you, my parents didn't see this story being played out the way that it did. And they learned through that experience just how quickly two teenage girls can communicate about something. And it was on a cold October night that all of this started to be played out. It was during an argument that my sister let it slip that there was more to the story of my life. And ultimately, she encouraged me to ask our parents for more to the story about it. And a lot of people ask me in hindsight, didn't you ever see news like this coming? Didn't you ever feel different growing up? And I can emphatically tell you, no, I didn't see this news coming. Back then, I didn't know that abortions could fail. I didn't know that children could survive. And even if I would have known those things, I never would have thought for a second that I was one of them. And so to hear my mom speak the words that night, Missy, your biological mother had an abortion during her pregnancy with you, and you survived it. My world came crashing down. As you can imagine, those are words that no one is ever prepared to hear. And I'm the first person to admit back then, this is not who I wanted to be. Back then, I just wanted to be like everyone else. As I shared, I didn't ever know that there was anybody else like me back then. It took a number of years before I found out that there were other survivors. That's now the ministry work that I do around the world with the Abortion Survivors Network, is support and advocate for survivors around the world. We've now connected with 325 other abortion survivors. And so I know that God really redeemed that part of my life. But back then it was a struggle for me. I tried to run away from the truth about who God made me to be, and I stumbled a lot on that journey. But I love that in the midst of that, God showed me so much about who He is, who I am, and truly about how abortion affects each and every one of our lives. And I think the most healing thing that happened to me years ago was that I first forgave my biological parents. And I say first time because for me, this is not a destination that I just get to arrive at. For me, forgiveness is a deliberate choice I make every single day. And I forgive my biological parents. I forgive my abortionist. I forgive my maternal grandmother. And I encourage you to really seek to forgive other people in the same way. I know that it defies our human nature. It is a divine grace to be able to forgive people. But if you're struggling with forgiveness, I just encourage you to pray for that grace to be able to forgive, because it truly sets you free. I would not be who I am. I would not do what I do in this world if I didn't forgive those who set out to harm me, whether it was intentional or unintentional. And truly that forgiveness set me out on a path to go looking for my biological parents. I started looking for them when I was about 19 years old, and I didn't find them until I was almost 30. During those 10 years of searching, I was also looking for my medical records. I achieved my master's degree in social work. I married my husband. Most people thought I lived a pretty normal life. What they didn't know during those years of searching is that whole time I was desperately seeking God's will. I had felt like I was being called to share His story with the world. But before I did that, I wanted to make sure that I had tried to obtain those medical records and tried to find my biological family, because I wanted them to hear from me first. And maybe you've lived out those other years in your life too, where maybe God's timing is not matching up with the timetable you have set out in your head, where God's will just seems like it's a little bit out of your grasp. I learned in those 10 years to fully surrender my life to Him and trust that if things were going to happen, it was going to happen in His way and in His time. And of course, lo and behold, it did. In 2007, I finally obtained my medical records and through them found my biological parents. I am one of the few abortion survivors who has any medical record of the abortion procedure. You can see copies of my medical records on my website, in various videos, in my book. I'm not afraid anymore of who God made me to be. In those medical records, they say things like, a saline infusion for an abortion was done, but was unsuccessful. Isn't that an interesting statement? In a world that doesn't want to talk about abortion and what it really is, my medical records are pretty clear. I'm only alive because abortion didn't succeed with what it was meant to do. And as I shared through those medical records, I ultimately found my biological parents, because in those records, they committed a big mistake. In one little tiny corner, they forgot to black out my birth parents' names. That's when God's plans of redemption and restoration in my biological family really started to be lived out. Because I learned through searching that I was living in the very same city as my biological father. I had moved to Sioux City, Iowa during my 10 years of searching, knowing that that's where my birth mother's abortion had taken place. But I never really thought that my biological family was from that area. And over 30 years later, who could have guessed that I would still have biological family there? But God knew. And I prayed about it for many months after finding out who my birth parents were. I ended up sending my biological father a letter back in 2007, knowing that that is what I was called to do. I let him know all the things I've told you all tonight, and of course let him know here we were living in the very same city. If he ever wanted to connect or establish a relationship with me, I would be waiting to hear from him. And I'm still waiting. 13 years later. And I know that that brings up a lot of emotions for people because so many of us have searched for someone in our lives. But I hope that, like me, you can find peace in knowing that in the midst of whatever you're searching for, whoever you're searching for, God is always still working. You know, about that same time in 2007, I set my sights on my birth mother and her family. I couldn't find my birth mother through my searching, but I found her parents very easily. You know, the grandmother that I told you all about. Does anybody else do things in their life, look back on it and think, wow, I can't believe I did that? That's me, 120%. I call those the Holy Spirit inspired moments where I am clearly doing things that I would not otherwise do. You know, looking back on it, I can't believe that I sent my grandparents a letter. I didn't know back then that my grandmother played the role in the abortion that she did. But looking back on that, the much bigger part of me looks back on it and says, wow, Melissa, I'm sure glad that you did that, because they probably needed to hear from you as much as your birth mother did. And I did hear back from them just a few short days after I sent them a letter. My grandfather replied, let me know that my live birth was not the intention that day at the hospital, which I think was very courageous of him. But it was equally courageous for him to go on and tell me some things about my birth mother and their family. And I want to share two of those points with you because they will once again remind you of why the work of insight is so important. One of the points my grandfather shared was that my birth mother had never told anyone about her abortion. And I know she's not alone in that. So many women and men carry the secret of an abortion throughout their lives. And whether it's you or someone you know, I want you to know that insight also exists to serve you or that other person you know. It's not just about serving someone in a time of crisis in their life. It's also about serving someone after an abortion has occurred and they need healing. But my grandfather closed his letter with a final point, and it was an interesting one initially. He let me know my messages would not be passed along to my birth mother. They were completely estranged, had no communication. And it makes sense to me now, and I'm sure it does to you too, right? Now knowing that they forced that abortion upon my birth mother, it makes incredible sense that their relationship has been forever changed. And I share that with you because I see it in families around the world. Abortion doesn't just end a life most of the time. It impacts people's relationships. It changes families for generations unless healing occurs. And that is the last time I heard from my grandparents was well over 13 years ago. That's also when I came forward as a survivor publicly for the very first time. And you know what I love is that as I started to travel the world in defense of life and loosen my grip on my career as a social worker to take up the cause of pro-life advocacy, the Lord blessed me with my first child. Our oldest daughter, Olivia, is now 12. We also have a 5-year-old. I had to think for a minute. 5 going on 6, Ava. And I was just a few days pregnant with Olivia the first time I ever shared my story publicly. And I know that was a sign from God that I was doing exactly what I was called to do. You know, during that pregnancy with Olivia, I started to travel around the world in defense of life. What I didn't know is that at the same time, my birth father was back home fighting for his. That's why I never heard back from him, because he passed away not long after I sent him that letter. And I only learned that because I Googled his name one night on the internet and found his obituary. And maybe you've lived out those years in your life too, where when something happens, you question God, how that can be the plan. And I can tell you I questioned God, and God spoke so plainly back to me in my grief and said, be patient, Melissa, because my plan is much greater than the one you had in mind. And it's always true, isn't it? God's plan may not look anything like we expected to, anything like we wanted to, but God's plan is always greater. And as 2008 unfolded, I got to see God's great plan. God's plan involved Olivia being born at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, the very same hospital where my life was supposed to end. And it also involved my birth father's family coming into my life after he passed away. They found my letter tucked in his top desk drawer at work, which is where I had sent it. And they learned the great secret that he had carried throughout his life, ultimately to his passing. So in their grief, they entered into my life. And I am forever grateful to have my grandfather, who just passed away recently, and my great aunt be a part of my family. And God wasn't done yet. It took many more years for all of his plans to unfold. But ultimately, my birth mother and her family have entered into my life. When we moved to the Kansas City area back in 2013, a cousin of hers reached out to me. That's how I learned that the abortion was forced and my grandmother was responsible for so many things. That cousin connected me with my biological mother and my 2 half-sisters by email. And that's how I learned the greatest secret that had existed over the years about my life that even my adoptive parents didn't know. And that is that my birth mother spent over 30 years of her life believing that I had died that day at the hospital. You heard me correctly. She didn't know. She didn't know if it had been a little boy or a little girl who had lost their life in that abortion procedure. All she was told was that the abortion had been successful. And what she did know is that she lived the rest of her life with incredible regret. If there's one thing about my life I could change, that's what I would change. For her to know the truth all along so she wouldn't have to live with that kind of pain and suffering over the years. But I am so grateful that she knows the truth now, and she knows that she is loved and forgiven. And what I love about God's plan of restoration and redemption in our family is that when I moved to Kansas City back in 2013, what I didn't know is that this is where my birth mother lives, along with one of my half-sisters. She's lived here for well over 30 years of her life. And so God had this plan for our family to be restored. And now my birth mother is one of the greatest supports in my life. You will catch her in interviews from time to time with me as we share our story together, because we both believe that as women deserve services and support, just like Insight offers. Children deserve the chance at life and to be loved. And so, again, I am just so grateful for the work of Insight. I am so grateful for each and every one of you. And I want to take our closing of our time together tonight to talk about how you can make a difference. I know people hear my story and think, wow, Melissa's really called to do that. Yeah, you could say that. I'm called to do this, right? But God blesses each and every one of us in different ways. So maybe it's the gift of time to volunteer. Maybe it's the gift of talent. Maybe there's a project you can work on at Insight that they could really use your skills on. And yes, maybe they also need not only your prayers, but your financial treasure. We know we can't put a price tag on life because every life is priceless. But in reality, there is a cost that Insight Women's Center incurs in order to provide the life-saving, life-transforming resources and supports that they do. And so tonight I want to talk about your giving of your time, your talent, and your treasure. I just wrote down some notes from things that Bridget had shared with me. As you heard, they're going to be expanding physical space there at the center, much needed. They're going to be expanding access to services through the medical mobile unit and in other places on campus and throughout Lawrence. Incredible. What an impact that is going to make. And also expanding services to include STI testing and expanding their educational offerings to be web-based. So needed right now, right? They are expanding. And as they expand, it's not only an expansion of their vision, but an expansion of the cost that is going to be incurred to do so. So they not only need to provide services now more than ever, they need you more than ever. You probably have seen in your information heading into tonight, there's a giving link that you can access to give your gift, or you can also mail in your gift to the center. So you have those materials, and I don't want to take up time by talking about them, but I want to talk to you about the pledge cards that you have received about tonight. You will see on your pledge card, you can make a one-time gift to help meet the immediate needs of the ministry. So they have indicated $10,000, $5,000 on down, and of course, other. Every gift given sacrificially, I know the Lord is going to take it and multiply it. And I know I can say on behalf of Insight, they are so thankful for any gift you give. You can also make an ongoing pledge. So essentially, it's a monthly pledge. And again, they have indicated from $1,000 to other. You can make automatic monthly gifts to be, of course, transferred every single month, your EFT. And so that's not anything that you even have to think about or worry about. You can use a check. You can enclose cash in an envelope. You can use your credit or debit card to make that one-time gift or the ongoing monthly pledge. And you can fill that out on your pledge card. But before you do that, I just want to encourage you for a second. I know this is a trying time for everyone, but the Lord has done some amazing things in my life and my family's in the midst of everything that's happened in the last few months. And what He has reminded me is I always have more to give. My husband and I adopted a motto a number of years ago, and maybe you've heard it before, but the motto is live more simply so someone else can simply live. Live more simply so someone else can simply live. We adopted that motto years ago, and it transformed our family, but these last few months have shown us once again just how much we can do to live more simply so that we have the funds to give both one-time gifts and monthly pledges to ministries just like Insight Women's Center. So that's my encouragement for you tonight is there a way that you've learned in the last few months in particular that you can live more simply so that you can give both a one-time gift and even a small monthly pledge to Insight Women's Center? Because by living more simply, someone else will simply live. Thank you so much for your support of this ministry. Stay well, and I look forward to seeing you sometime at a future event.
Well, thank you, Melissa. That was fantastic. It really, really was. So we're almost to the end of our first ever virtual fundraising event. It's been great. We really like to see people in person, and hopefully the 2021 event will all be in a big room together. But with all that said, just remember too, you can participate in this as well. You click at the link down at the bottom, or you're already on the website, so go ahead and find where you can donate on there. And with all that said, I am going to sign off here. More importantly, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor John McDermott, and he's going to close us in a word of prayer. Thank you very much for attending tonight. God bless you, and we hope to see you soon.
Let's pray together. Jesus, thank you for this time. Lord, please keep our hearts in this place of knowing the reality we've seen and heard. Help us to move from this time to bear your name in a way that gives life to those around us and stimulates more and more people to trust in you, King Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you and have a great rest of your day.